Welcome to Dictators v Democrats, War on Democracy, where we analyse the past week of the news around the world in the conflict between authoritarianism and the free world. Well, this is a bit of a different episode. I must apologise for missing last week's Roundup. I was moving house and it was exhausting. But I am now all set up, again in a rather nicer new home. Before we begin, I do have one thing to ask of you, my friends. If you enjoy this work and want to see this project grow, then find one person, just one, in your circle who may enjoy it as well and send it their way. Democracy needs defenders and you can help grow those ranks. So, what have we had over the past 2 weeks? Well, elections, repressions, and resignations. Firstly, onto the European front, we had 2 major and hard-fought elections over the past couple of weeks in Moldova and the Czech Republic, which gave us one clear victory and one close defeat. In Moldova, the election was a fulcrum moment for the country. President Maia Sandu's pro-EU Party of Action and Solidarity, PAS, won a resounding victory against the pro-Russia Patriotic Bloc, name full of irony, causing sighs of relief across the free world. PAS came out on top with 50.2% of the vote against the Patriotic Bloc's 24.2%, which, by any metric, being around double, is a pretty stunning victory. President Sandu said on X, "This is not just a party's victory, this is Moldova's victory. The European path is our way forward." And international reactions have been split along expected lines. A joint statement by the leaders of France, Germany and Poland lauded Moldova for, quote, "the peaceful conduct of the election despite unprecedented interference from Russia, including vote buying schemes and disinformation." And the Russians were unsurprisingly irked. Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maia Zakharova wrote on the ministry's website that they hoped Moldova would not become a, quote, anti-Russian appendage of NATO, and added the outcome confirms a deep split in Moldovan society caused by the destructive policy of the country's leaders. As history shows, a truly strong and secure future lies in developing equal cooperation with all countries. Russia doesn't ever seek equal cooperation with countries, especially those which it occupies, given Russia currently illegally occupies a large chunk of Moldova, another example of land grabbing from the nation that already enjoys the largest land mass of any nation in the world by far. And some parties were barred from the election. The Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, which observed the election, said they had demonstrated, quote, "a high level of commitment to democracy amid unprecedented hybrid threats coming from Russia." They did, however, add criticism of the party bans just days before the elections, which, quote, "limited their right to seek effective remedy." And the parties were barred over allegations of illegal financing. Where have we seen that before? Russia poured enormous amount of effort and money into this election, as did the EU. It appears that it's likely to become the norm in European elections in the future. Russia will back any party that argues for isolationism and against support for democracies working together, especially with regards to Russia's illegal and imperialist war in Ukraine. The EU will counter with its own efforts to attract forward-thinking voters who want a democratic community. And this brings us on to the Czech Republic elections and a rather different outcome. I really cringe when I see the words billionaire populist. To me, this tends to mean wannabe neo-feudal lord desperate to bring about the dystopian cyberpunk future, which we are trying to combat here. Billionaire populist Andrej Babiš and his ANO party won parliamentary elections in the Czech Republic, although they fell well short of an outright majority. ANO managed to secure 35% of the vote, gaining 80 of 200 seats in the lower house, and Babiš is now likely to enter talks on forming a new coalition. He's going to enter these talks most likely with the anti-green Motorists for Themselves Party, an appropriately selfish name, and the Freedom and Direct Democracy, or SPD party, the latter of which has advocated mass deportations of Ukrainian refugees. Worryingly, Babiš has advocated scrapping the very successful Czech ammunition initiative, which has sent 3.5 million shells to Ukraine since 2022. He's also dismissed claims that Western allies may be worried that the Czech Republic would no longer be a reliable partner in NATO or the EU, looking at you, Hungary, saying to a New York Times journalist, quote, "Your problem is you just copy lies from Czech journalists." He added, quote, "I spoke with Trump 5 times. I was in the Pentagon. I was in the FBI. I talked to the head of the CIA. We were a very reliable partner." And we shall see where this goes. It's unlikely that Babiš will be able to seriously shift the Czech Republic's support for Ukraine, which has always been very strong and continues to be strong amongst the Czech public. So we'll have to see where it goes. So, a victory against Russian imperialism in Moldova and some worrying moves in the Czech Republic, but don't lose your head over it just yet. The European front has been fairly spicy this past fortnight, and we're going to continue on that theme as we move on to the Georgian front, which has been hotting up yet again. Protests that have been ongoing for almost a full year now after the fraudulent elections of October 2024 continue to pile pressure on the Georgian Dream, or GD's, party's regime. These have escalated during recent local elections, which were largely boycotted by the opposition. Georgia's Prime Minister, Irakli Kopakidze, has launched a huge crackdown on dissent, accusing demonstrators who allegedly tried to storm the presidential palace of aiming to topple his illegal government and claiming that the EU is interfering in his country, despite Russian FSB cars being spotted on the streets of the capital, Tbilisi. Kopakidze said, quote, "No one will escape responsibility. This includes political responsibility." And 5 demonstrators have been detained, including 2 members of the opposition United National Movement and the opera singer Pata Butchuladze. And these arrests are the latest in a long string since GD took power. People have been arrested for such innocuous things as writing Russian Dream on a GD banner, seems fairly accurate to me, and accusing GD politicians of colluding with the Kremlin. And GD is controlled by its founder, Bidzina Ivanishvili, the richest man in the country, who allegedly has his own Bond villain-esque shark tank. He is sanctioned by the United States for promoting Russian interests. Billionaires and democratic backsliding, we see this time and time again. And now onto the French front. This was breaking news yesterday as I wrote the roundup for the Substack. France is facing yet another round of political chaos and turmoil as its latest Prime Minister, Sébastien Lecornu, resigned after only 26 days in the role. Liz Truss, eat your heart out, beaten yet again. He quit after unveiling his cabinet, which bore little difference from his predecessor, François Bayrous, and this was heavily criticised in the National Assembly across the board. Several parties are now calling for early elections, and some are pressing President Macron to stand down, although he has pledged to remain in post until his term ends in 2027. In a speech outside Hôtel de Matignon, the Prime Minister's residence, Lecornu attacked the, quote, partisan appetites of France's political blocs, who he claimed, quote, are all behaving as if they had an absolute majority. And he added, I was ready for compromise, but all parties wanted the other party to adopt their programs in their entirety. And there are no signs of the chaos that has plagued French politics since 2024 abating. The lines are simply far too entrenched at this stage, especially over the hot-button issues of the budget deficit sitting at 5.8% of GDP last year and the national debt sitting at 114% of GDP, surpassed in the Eurozone only by Greece and Italy. Where France goes from here, is anybody's guess, but it's going to be likely more chaotic. And finally, we leave Europe and we go to Syria. On Sunday, the 5th, Syria held its first parliamentary elections since the overthrow of dictator Bashar al-Assad, who is now living in Russia. The parliament, known as the People's Assembly, will be tasked with passing new legislation and constitutional law as the country transitions into the post-Assad future. Now, the elections are a bit strange. They were not a direct popular vote. Rather, 2/3 of the 210-member House are elected through provincial electoral colleges, with seats distributed by population. And the final third is appointed directly by interim President Ahmed al-Shara. Now, on paper, 7,000 electoral college members across 60 districts are eligible to vote for the 140 seats allocated to them, but this has not been able to occur. Some provinces were unable to return votes, especially in Syria province and areas controlled by the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces due to tensions with those authorities and the government in Damascus. And the system does fall short of full democracy, and there are concerns that the Electoral College will favour well-connected candidates. Answering those concerns, the interim authorities have claimed that a popular vote is impossible at the moment due to mass displacement of Syrians around the world and loss of documents in the decades-long conflict that has taken place there. And a member of the National Elections Committee in Damascus, Lara Izuki, said that the elections are, quote, the first time in Syria's history that the ballot box truly rules when the results are not prearranged. And speaking to the Associated Press, a former soldier, Ibrahim Halabi, 33, from Aleppo, said, quote, this is the first time in our lives we've participated in a democratic electoral process without outside pressure. And there are concerns over the nature of the process. However, there is a process and there is progress, and with it, perhaps some hope. And finally, on to terra firma, the global front, because you cannot have democracy on a dying world. And Pope Leo XIV has made his position on climate change very, very clear. He has called for pressure to be placed on governments to protect the natural world and stressed that damaging it is incompatible with the Christian faith. And speaking at a climate conference on October 1st, he said, quote, we cannot love God, whom we cannot see, while despising his creatures. And he added, everyone in society, through non-governmental organizations and advocacy groups, must put pressure on governments to develop and implement more rigorous regulations, procedures, and controls. And this is his first major speech on the environment since his election in May. And it was time to influence the Paris COP21 summit and may have an impact on galvanizing religious groups. And he referenced next month's COP30 conference in Brazil, saying he hopes that it and other summits, quote, will listen to the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor, families, indigenous peoples, involuntary migrants, and believers throughout the world. And in an appeal for a, quote, true ecological conversion, which changes people's hearts, he said, quote, we must shift from collecting data to caring. He added, God will ask us if we have cultivated and cared for the world that he created for the benefit of all and future generations, and if we have taken care of our brothers and sisters. What will be our answer? I am generally very skeptical on theological influence in politics, but Pope Leo XIV is saying many of the right things for me. Let us hope that the leaders at COP30 listen. And finally, quickfire onto other fronts around the world, because there is an enormous amount going on. Onto the Tanzanian front, opposition leader Tundu Lissu is going on trial for treason just weeks before the general elections due to take place on the 29th of October. He is accused of inciting rebellion via speech. Interesting. On the Cameroon front, President Paul Biya, aged 92 and in power since 1982, is seeking an 8th term in October's presidential elections. Interesting. On the Gabon front, in the first election since the 2023 coup d'etat, President Olusegun Nguema's ruling party, UDP, won the plurality of seats, 55 of 145, and a second round is scheduled for the 11th of October, as there has been no clear winner. And finally, onto the culinary front, I was privileged to make some lovely venison steaks the other night, and they came out really rather perfectly, and I am smug about that. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been the weekly roundup in the War on Democracy, more accurately the fortnightly roundup in the War on Democracy. I do hope you enjoyed the program. If you have any questions, comments, concerns or critiques, please let me know in the comments below. And if you know one person, just one, who you think may enjoy this program as well, share it with them. Tell them why. Because we Democrats, well, we have friends everywhere. Thank you.